To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Well, welcome back, gardeners and homesteaders. You are tuned in to the Backyard Gardens podcast, and I think it's time we start talking about seeds, Batavia. You cool?
Oh, that was terrible. Hold on. There you go.
There we go. There we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and systematically break down seed starting this year. It's a passion of mine, and I think Batavia may be falling in love with it slowly but surely. What do you think?
It's a means to an end, and it fills the void of being outdoors. That's the reason why I never come back to seed starting once I'm outdoors.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough once you get everything out, but timing for seeds is every single thing. This is the time of year to get your garden in the right path for the year, especially if you're seed starting. And so we don't want to be left behind and be struggling to get seeds going. And you know how it is. You'll be sitting there chewing your nails. Oh, please grow, please grow. We don't want to do that, but we also don't want to be sitting there chewing our nails on the other aspect, being like, please slow down, please slow down. So it's a fine line that we need to kind of take care of. So these are the first seeds to start for your spring garden.
And I think that you'd rather be early than late, especially based on kind of the time sensitivity and how weather is sensitive around this time. So,
yeah. And I mean, I think it's one thing, and I've noticed this through a lot of different avenues, is it's hard to believe that you can put plants out when it's cold outside still. And I mean, I'm not talking about sub-zero temperatures, don't get me wrong, but once you start breaking out of those winter patterns and you're starting to get a little bit warmer days and your nights aren't quite as cold, like a lot of the seeds that we're going to talk about today can very well take that. And I mean, you've got to have grow time in order to get them before it gets warm too. For some areas, like in my area, if I don't get I have about a 2-week planting window for my broccoli. And if I miss that, then I just get flowers, and I don't really want broccoli flowers. Nothing makes me more angry than my broccoli bolting. That's just end of story. That just makes me mad. So, I mean, going into it and, cheap plug, I've been making custom seed starting charts for people. If you want one of those, there's an email address below. We can make you one for a small fee. But after I've done a number of them over a number of states, I was just showing Batavia, you can visually see the layout in different areas of seeds to start. And most of the seeds are to be started in February and March for most regions that we've done. And I've done I think I have 50 different areas I've done. So there's a lot of different, growth patterns, and it's so fascinating to me to see that. So far, the best place to grow food for an even across the board has been Northern California, though. That was the best place I've come across. But that being said, even there, February and March are big seed starting months.
Yeah, I think that so the disclaimer here, and if you're not in this space yet, it's our hope that through listening to this podcast, you will get there. This is absolutely for multi-season gardeners, so we're talking about people that are growing in spring, summer, and fall. When you look at those charts and when you look at, across the year, you're growing starting the majority of your seeds in February and March, so I think the story is different if you just had a summer garden, right? But again, that's not our story, and we don't believe that that's the experience that most people want to have.
No, and I mean, if I had a dream and it was for this podcast, it would be that we started so many seeds that, like Bonnie and those places that sell transplants that are just ripping people off now, would actually have to lower their prices to get people to come in. That would be like what I would hope to come out of this platform, because you can't, if you have a big garden, it's almost like you're not making any headway financially in growing your own food. All you're doing is scratching that itch to grow food, which is understandable, but financially speaking, it's a fraction of the cost when it comes to seed starting. I know we've said that a bunch, but it just kind of sets you forward in the right direction.
So I love that as a goal, right? I love that as a initiative. As some of you all know, I buy transplants for some of my brassicas each year. And I think that it's only because of the difficulties I have starting those particular plants. And my logic is, when you take the entire garden season and all things that I'm growing, if I could spend $20-$25 on spring transplants, and then everything else I'm growing in my garden is grown from seed by my hand, then it balances out. I definitely have never gone to the grocery store and spent less than $25. So I think that you step this up. Like, these are steps you take in your process as a gardener. Yeah. Like, some people come out of the gate and it's like all seeds. And I am really impressed by that. Right. And it is absolutely the most economical way. And I think that if you're starting out, start there. Right. Make your idea of going to get transplants like, I don't want to be too extreme of it's a last resort, but I want that to be the alternative, not the primary path. You know what I'm saying? Yeah,
exactly. And later on in the conversation, I do want to cover the brassica issue a little bit, because I think it will help people. But I had a guy, it's no secret that I sell seedlings, and had a gentleman come by last year, and he was like, "Do you sell Bonnie bell peppers?" And I was like, "No, I don't sell Bonnie bell peppers." He was like, "Well, that's all I buy." And I'm like, "Well, why didn't you just go buy some Bonnie bell peppers at the store if that's what you want? Like, why are you coming to me wasting my time, dude?" He's like, "Well, I figured you'd have them at a cheaper price." I'm like, "No, go over there and buy." You know what I mean? It's like, come on, man. If you're going to, but the thing is that individual didn't understand. He's in the mindset that a seedling, if it doesn't come from a store, is not worth anything. It's not any good. And that's something that we can break. And as much as I like to sell seedlings, I would rather not sell seedlings and have everybody doing that themselves, because it just helps you with so many more varieties and choices and options and things that go in your garden. And you really start to understand, and this is where we start to get into it, what things can grow in the cooler temperatures. So, there is an order. You can't just be like, all right, I'm going to have a fall garden or a spring garden, and I'm just going to start all of my seeds for spring right now. That's not how it works, because some need to be a little bit warmer, but need to be cool still. And some need a longer growing season. And we need to make sure that we fulfill those requirements for these plants.
Yeah. And that's, also, when it comes to your garden plan, that's why that's super important. So the seed starting charts and I'd like to believe that I was the first, I was like patient zero in the best way,
Yeah, you were.
For a seed starting chart. I guess you were, and then I'd be like the one that caught the contagion. And you look and say, like, it's such a great starting point. And I don't know if I mentioned this in the last episode, but this is one of the 3 reasons I feel like I am the most prepared coming into this garden season. And I don't speak in grandiose terms like that.
No, you don't.
And so I look at this and I say, all right, I know what I'm starting, but I also understand the growth pattern for these plants, these different crops, these different vegetables and herbs and so on. And so with that in mind, I know when I'm going to plant these out, right? And I know how long these things generally how long these things are going to be in my garden, right? So that's a mixture of everything from research I've done on these particular vegetables, right? How long from seed to harvest, so to speak. And then things I've seen in my garden in itself, like to your point, the window for broccoli for me is super tight too, So
is it?
Yeah. Like if I still have broccoli in my garden, and this is only for a handful of years I've been monitoring this. If I still have broccoli in my garden by June 20th, it's bolted broccoli. So, by the time in our summers, the spring to summer really creeps up. It's like a really slow warm up. But by the time we get to mid-June, I should be looking at, all right, I'm pulling these heads no matter the size. So then you back that thing up. Sorry, I cut myself. You back that thing up to say, all right, when should I be putting these broccoli plants out? Which corresponds with when I'm starting my broccoli plants by seed, Oh, and by the way, although we'll talk about it at the end, just because I have issues every year with the brassicas doesn't mean I don't start brassicas every year.
Yeah, you just keep tweaking and tweaking and tweaking. Spoiler alert, I just got a Brussels sprout harvest yesterday. That's right, everybody. 4 years it took me. So, I'm the king of perseverance. Let's just say that.
Congratulations, man.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing.
I changed his photo on my contacts in my phone to now every time he calls or I call him, I'll see the broccoli picture.
She's lying. It's on her cover screen. Don't even let her front.
That's when the thing got weird just now. In all of these years, it got weird in this moment.
It got weird. So, the first seed is going to be onions across the board. And February may not be the time for you to start onions, but in the future, preparing onions is the first thing across the board. A lot of times you're starting them in the previous calendar year to plant them out in this calendar year. So, you may be starting them in December, January, February is, kind of getting towards the end because they can take a long growth period. But that's like the first one. They're incredibly resilient.
Yeah.
And you're doing... Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm doing sweet onions. I still have a small window where I may, just for the experiment in the garden's sake, buy some onion transplants because I want to see the difference in the size of the ones I grow from seed compared to them, which we have a whole lot of dialogue on kind of what makes for a more productive plant, right? Larger. Right. Vegetables and all of that. So we're not going to get into that here. But yeah, onions first out. And 5 years ago, I would have never thought that.
Yeah, me either.
And it's interesting because that's such an interesting crop because it's in your garden for so long too. And don't let that fool you as if to think, oh, you have so much more time because it's in the garden so long. No, it needs to be in the garden that long.
Yeah, 5 years ago, I was direct sowing onions in May and wondering why I wasn't getting onions. Now I'm planting them in December and January and harvesting them in June, and now I know why I wasn't getting onions. So that's the first one, and it scratches that itch. In the cold, and you watching it grow, and it's actually a plant that you need to be hands-on with. And so, for a while, for about 2 months, that's really all we grow here. And then we get into cabbages. So cabbages are huge.
And onions, you're starting indoors, right?
Well, no, not necessarily. So onions, first of all, I do not ever direct sow onions. And second of all, when I start them, if I start them in the fall, I start them outside and they just live in the 6-packs outside all winter. But then I usually, because I sell the onions as well, I will start another round inside and move them out. And so this year we've done the same thing where we started another round and we moved them out. And they sell very fast, but they will go out and they will be able to take these cold nights that we have. We're looking at getting into the teens in the next couple of weeks, and I'm not overly concerned about them. The only reason why I'm going to protect them is just because they're a product. So I'm going to protect them just to make sure that I have a product to sell. But otherwise, like the ones in my garden and stuff, I'm not going to do anything for them. I'm just going to let them live their best life out in the yard and grow.
Yeah.
But it's all about, when you're putting the plants out, it's all about them being in being mature enough to handle the chilly temperatures. And that's when we get into the cabbages.
Yeah.
So cabbages have a long growing season too.
Yeah, not as long as onions, but they definitely, when you kind of think about the how it changes from, it looks like any other transplant, you know, when you get to the point of like, I'm transplanting it from my inside to the garden, you know, though all those brassicas look alike at the beginning, you know, but unlike something like my beloved collard greens, it has to go through this point of forming that head. And that's actually a really good indicator when it comes to like growth time. If something has to go through the whole action of forming a head and getting firm, you know, it's one of those crops that really, again, is going to need to take some time. Generally people aren't harvesting leaves of cabbage.
Yeah.
You know, like there's no
I don't
cut
know
and come
anybody
again
that does. I'm sure there's people that do that, but
yeah, there's no really cut and come again. There are people that would harvest the main head and wait for the side shoots because we love side shoots. But it's one of those things that, you know, you're going to need 90 plus days from transplant, kind of like hard stop, you know.
So if you think about that, and you know, it's interesting that you threw in the transplant portion because that's not what the seed packets say. But that is the experience that I have is 90 days from transplant. So we're talking 2 months before I plant, and that 2 months includes seeding, growing, and mostly hardening off, might be 9 weeks. And then you have another 90 days after that, but you're forming a head. So just like Batavia said, there's so much to that, and it takes it so long. And for us, like if I don't, so my plant out date for my cabbages is generally like February 15th in my area. If I can continue planting periodically for about the next month, and then I start messing with, you know, the dark arts after that. So it's like, I don't know if it's going to bolt. I don't know if it's going to split. And the real problem is it won't come out in time, and it'll delay the rest of my garden because we are succession sowing, succession planting other plants behind it. So it messes up that whole time frame. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather have my tomatoes in the ground than my cabbages. Yeah,
definitely. For a number of different reasons. I think that this is a good example, like to compare and contrast, right? You know, so if you can remember, Leonard, when Ben transplants his cabbage into the garden, I want to go outside in Chicago to see if my ground is frozen. Yeah. So I suspect my ground will still be, my garden, you know, beds will still be frozen when you're planting, you know, and so that's such a good example of, it sounds good, right? You know, I'm rooting for you and your beyond doorknob size cabbage this year. But the reality is I can't meet you there. You know what I'm saying? No. Like it's just for my growing area. It's different. And it's funny because our average last frost dates are very similar, but frost and frozen, you know, and all of that, which we won't get into in this episode because you and I both get wrapped around the axle around that. But that absolutely makes a difference, you know.
Yeah, and I mean it's funny because when you go into it, you know, I never would be suggesting like, hey, go to your tool rental place and rent a jackhammer and get your ground busted up. Like that's not what we're talking about. But I will tell you, the way that I've planned my garden has worked out really good for me last year, and I'm going to continue it. Is I plant my cabbages. And I plant my cabbages in particular in the same bed that I'm going to put my sweet potatoes, because I have to start my sweet potatoes like a month after I have to plant them a month after my last frost date. So I automatically am not rushed to get those cabbages out of the ground. And that really worked for me last year because I was able, you know, as we start planting, you know, I had somebody the other day say, I would like to see weekly garden updates from you. And it's funny because it's like for most of it, it'd be like, okay, well, here's the same stuff. Here's the same stuff. But then there is a period of time in which it is changing weekly. And the last thing for spring to come out of my garden is generally going to be my cabbages because they just take so long. But once you start getting that heat, which we typically get very quickly, you can kind of get in the weeds with that. And then you, like I said before, you're just backing up and you're not having, your plan is starting to fall apart in front of your eyes. And it's really hard to catch up that early in the season to get everything going. And some places have a very short season for summer crops.
Spring crops.
No, summer crops.
Oh.
Because if you miss your date and then you're like, well, now I got to put my tomatoes in, but you're 2-3 weeks behind because you wanted your cabbages, you've burned very valuable time.
Yeah. And cabbage is just, as an example, is an interesting crop because for you, it's one that it doesn't really bolt. Like once it starts to form a head, it forms a head. And for me, and you tell me if it's different for you, cabbage can sit in my garden at the end of spring, early summer for quite a while. I mean, I had a head of cabbage that I pulled I think it was closer to the first frost. It was tucked into a little space. So planted in April and not pulled. Now it had been long ready to harvest. And I ended up having to take a bunch of leaves off, just based on it sitting dormant all of that time. But yeah, it could be a garden hog if you let it. So the motto should be get it in and get it out. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I was getting doorknob cabbages last year because I just didn't want to sit on and wait on it. Now, I've never had a cabbage bolt. I will say that, but usually it's because I'm getting them out quickly.
Yeah, the only time I've had a cabbage bolt was planting it in the fall, too late. It's sitting dormant over winter, and then in that spring, I was crossing fingers and toes, and now it bolted. Yeah.
So Leonard sent me a message that apparently we forgot to put on the list, but celery is another one, which isn't a big crop to grow.
It's one of those things. It's kind of like what you are accustomed to, like what's in your vicinity is oftentimes the thing you're drawn to. I honestly, and my grandmother is somewhere saying, girl, we fed you celery. I don't remember ever eating celery growing up.
No. Nobody ate celery.
As I move into my adult years, my first memory of celery is it looking pitiful on some type of veggie platter or something, some type of appetizer somewhere. And then you fast forward to especially when I was in the mode of, I want to try to grow these new things to see how they do in my garden. And I really had great success with celery. Then you have to kind of search around, like, what am I going to do with all this celery? It's not even something I cook with it like once a year. That's when I make gumbo. And so anyway, I say all that to say I had celery up until mid-January this year in the garden, which is, that's a flex. I know it's celery, but it's still a flex.
It's okay.
And I found ways over the course of those months to use it. So I said all that to say, do I go to the store and just pick up, a couple of stalks of celery because I'm making something, or do I have it in my garden? And it's one of those things that is a longer time to grow. The celery that I had in the garden through January was transplanted very late in the summer. So I do want to note that. I don't know that if I would have planted it in the spring, would it have lasted that time? Because that's one of those crops that's sensitive to sun or to heat as well. But remember, we're in this kind of mid zone in Chicago where some things that are sensitive to heat still thrive. Not all, but some.
It's fascinating to me because celery has a long germination time.
Mm-hmm. Hence starting it,
Yeah, and that's something to really consider with some of these plants is the germination time. I know celery, parsnips. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think what else has carrots can have a really long germination time. Spinach can even have a long germination time as well if it's not the right temperature. Like it'll sit and wait until it's time. Mm-hmm. Can you think of anything else that's just got
you could list like a half a dozen herbs.
Herbs are herbs and flowers are a totally different ballgame.
Yeah, I think the exception. Basil is probably one of the fast germinating herbs, but other things like thyme, parsley, if you're starting, which we've talked about this in past years and I still recommend it, if you're starting rosemary by seed, good luck to you. We've talked about in the past, spend the, $4 or $5, buy the plant, especially if you can treat it as a perennial. It's just worth that investment for it to get some size, because you could use a whole sprig or two of rosemary in one dish, right? That's what the people do on Instagram and stuff.
Yeah, we have a rosemary plant and we don't hardly ever use rosemary. I just like it. I like the smell and stuff. But so anything with like a really long germination time, you really need to think about. And celery's is like 20 days.
Like they kind of put it in that bucket of like, it could take up to 21 days to germinate. And those are so tricky. And I almost encourage you to, again, hedge your bets and start a little early if you can, because 21 days to wait for something not to germinate, that's 3 weeks. That's a long time, right? So you may want to
miss your planting date if it doesn't germinate.
Yeah. Well, for me in my area, I've come to find that I could plant it a little bit longer than maybe most, but that may be something that you start out week 1. Fewer than you really want, then week 2 start another batch, so you can stagger it a little bit. It's up to you. You can do what you want to do, but it's definitely a slow germination, slow grower even. And these are all, again, indoors under lights. And I think really this is one of those, and I haven't looked this up, but I think seed age absolutely impacts, your germination success.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it does. So you've got onions, cabbage, and celery, and I think cabbage and celery, I think celery should actually go a little bit before cabbage if you're going to start it, just because of the germination time. And then the next one that's right there with cabbage is broccoli. So broccoli is another one. It can take the cold. It's very hardy. The difference is it's very sensitive to temperature fluctuations. And so a lot of times what people don't understand is it's bolting because the plant has gotten this hot cold fluctuation in the spring, and it's tricked into thinking that it's 2 years old. And so that's causing it to bolt. And that's a lot with a lot of the biennial plants, which means they seed every other year. A lot of times that's what happens, because as we get into spring, we may plant out and it's really cold, and then as it starts to warm up, and then you get a cold snap, and you keep doing this. The plants, it's not like us. It doesn't understand a calendar. It goes by temperature. But what I will say, and my experience is, cauliflower is not the same as broccoli. Cauliflower is a lot more delicate to temperature fluctuations.
Yeah, so seeding every other year, that's the plant ends up basically completing its life cycle in your garden and going to seed. We talk about plants bolting and producing flowers and producing seeds. That's that bit, if that terminology is new to your ears. Cauliflower, I feel like I've been doing wrong for the years I've been growing cauliflower, and it's shown in my production of cauliflower. Like each season I get like 1 or 2 heads, and so like my extension service advises starting broccoli and cauliflower at the same time. They kind of put them in the same bunch, but planting them out and when they want to grow, I've also read my extension service is different. So that's one of those bits where I dig deep if you plan on growing cauliflower to try to make sure you get that right, because it looks good and then it doesn't. Like it looks good for a while and then it's like, nope. Like my cauliflower ends up producing smaller heads when I plant them in the spring as transplants. And it's one of those bits where I've gotten some heads, but it's really not, honestly, it hadn't been worth the garden space.
Yeah. And I mean, I just don't enjoy cauliflower enough, so I've backed away from growing it. But
it's like celery. If you produce enough of it and you're like, hey,
Yeah, but I've tried all kinds of cauliflower stuff, and look, cauliflower rice is not rice. End of story. It tastes like cauliflower. Done. Prove me wrong, please. Send me a dish
for cauliflower.
Yeah.
You like the buffalo cauliflower wings. I feel like I'm betraying, the human race by referring to them as wings, but you get it.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. And I do like those, but it's just not enough to grow. And, you know, in my experience, like we would plant in the fall, which I know we're not talking about fall now, but that's when we planted it. And broccoli and cauliflower at the same time, we get a cold snap, the cauliflower would die off, the broccoli would do fine. And it is every year it was like that. So, you know, just make sure. And then what I would do if I was going to start those seeds, I would just stagger them by a week. You know, so by the time the broccoli...
Yeah, so as a quick example, my extension service, and this is for Central Illinois, and I'm not in Central Illinois, but it's fine for this example. Broccoli, they're suggesting planting out between April 10th and May 1st, and again, July 1 and July 15th for presumably a fall harvest. And then cauliflower, they give you 10 days, buddy. July 10th through July 20th. That's it. That's all, right?
And when you see stuff like that, that means that it's a difficult plant to grow in your area, you know? So that's one of the ones, that's another one that you can start really early. And, you know, you're, again, and we're going to take side shoots off the table. I know everybody loves side shoots. I do not like side shoots, but that's different. But, you know, to grow and get that one harvest, you need to have a fair amount of plants as well. So just remember that. And then going right in line, the next one is kale. I mean, and collards. I
was going to say get out of my head, but maybe it's because we're kind of working off of a similar list. But yeah.
Kale and collards. Yeah. I mean, they are very cold hardy plants. And you can start those at the same time as your cabbages and get them in the ground. And the beauty of those is they're continuous harvest. You know, most people don't harvest a whole head of collards or kale or anything like that. I know lettuce can be a little bit of both, but you know, so I start those. I'm blessed in my area where if I get a good crop in the fall and I can keep them growing, I don't have to restart them. But if I did, I'd be restarting them at the same time as my cabbages and stuff because they're just so hardy.
Yeah. So the importance about them being so hardy. So we're in the spring. We're marching towards spring. When this episode airs, we'll be just under or just over a month from spring, which is just kind of the monumental moment of its spring. But you want to get these things into your garden as soon as you can to take advantage of that cool weather that they prefer.
Right.
And the reason why things like, you know, your kales and your collards are so impressive in my view is because you can harvest them at any size, really, you know, so you can pick leaves, you know, from these plants at any size. And so those are going to be generally some of the earliest producing plants in your garden. Yeah. So why not take advantage of that? And if you're living in an area where weather will be problematic, so as it gets hotter, if those plants can't survive, again, you want to back up and say, well, I want to be able to harvest from those plants for as long as I want, or as possible, which means I need to get those out earlier. And those are things that do fine going out as smaller transplants as well. So yeah, those are all positives if that's what you want to grow and enjoy from your garden.
But they grow really fast too, you know, when you start the seeds. So, I mean, all of these seeds minus the celery that we've talked about have about a 7 to 10 day germination time. And I had well, never mind, we'll get into that. So, you know, thinking in that aspect, it's like, if I was to start my seeds in order so far, it would be cabbages, broccoli. I'd probably wait a week, and then I would do my kale and collards at the same time. And then that would push me to be able to harden them off in 8 weeks, roughly. You could do your kale and collards a little bit earlier if you wanted, but that's a good starting point.
Yeah. And I generally start them around the same time. And I only say that because I can grow collards and kale basically throughout the season, like throughout the spring and summer season back into fall. Some of my older kale plants, once we get later into the season, get attacked by bugs, but that's a whole different conversation. My cabbage is also one that can pretty much hold its own. Broccoli is probably, and cauliflower would be the most sensitive to my weather. So there's a part while both of them are a little bit more they're not as hardy as the other ones we've named. I do want to get those out into the garden as early as possible. Broccoli, that is. I've decided that for cauliflower, I'm just going to try to grow that in the fall. So I'm going to follow one of the recommendations from the Extension Service and focus on planting that midsummer. Now, this is the key. And this is also the reason why you keep trying. I can barely find cauliflower transplants in summer, right? I'll stumble at the smaller local, garden centers. I can find things like kale basically all year. Your big box, your Home Depots, your Lowe's, your Menards, they are long past the point midsummer of having, those kind of brassicas, right? So that's again why it's important. I probably will start cauliflower in the spring or in late winter, like around the same time, just to see if I can get it to grow, and if I get it to grow, I'm probably going to plant it. But my intention would be to have a fall crop for it instead.
Yeah.
And a crop could be just a handful of plants. It's not something that I love either,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just, and I mean, that's the beauty of it too. When you're starting your own seed, you can start 3 of them and say, I'm going to grow 3 plants instead of going to buy 6,
Yeah. Yep.
So it's important that, you take all that into account. And once you get those started, I think it's best to wait another week. So we're roughly 2 weeks after we've started, 2 to 3 weeks after we've started our cabbages and whatnot. And then you start getting into your mustard. And there's a big argument for growing. I know a lot of people don't like mustard, but there's a really big argument for growing mustard. And that's if you plant it behind where your tomatoes were and you chop the leaves up and put them back into the soil, it actually is a biofumigate for root knot nematodes. So if you have those in your area, you can put those, just chop them up and put them back in so you can enjoy them. You can get different levels of spiciness for your mustards, but then you can also help with the root knot nematodes and stuff like that in the future. So there's a little bit for that, but it's incredibly hardy as well. I mean, it's another one that for the most part will make it through the winter outside here. I've got a set of plants in the greenhouse, and then I've got a couple plants out in my garden, and they're in the wild garden, so they're not doing great, but one of them is bolting and one of them is hanging on. But as we get closer, like, they're going to start growing. So they can take a pretty good cold as well. We'll see what they do after this 19-degree cold, which I'll do a video on YouTube after that of what made it and what didn't, but we'll see how that happens.
Yeah, I have had mixed results with starting things like mustards and probably another couple items that are on our list indoors. Those plants tend to bolt. And I think it, again, ties back to how warm my house is.
Yeah.
I did... so I told you, kicking and screaming, I got a new furnace last year. And, it's very clear the difference in the old furnace, the actual thermostat, setting, and then how warm the home was. So you asked me in the last episode, I think, it may have been a subscription episode, kind of what do I normally set my thermostat at, and normally it was like kind of 72 in the winter. I could set and be pretty comfortable, unless I'm sitting right next to a window, but be pretty comfortable at like 68, which is unheard of in my mind.
Yeah.
But my basement, I have a little thermometer down there, and it's 71. So the overall house is set at something like 67, 68. But because my furnace is right down there, again, it's much warmer. It's weird. I don't have, how basements are normally a little bit colder. Nope, not mine.
Yeah. So I think this is a good time to talk about your brassicas. I had a lot of people ask me on a recent video, hey, what do you keep your temperature at in your house? This, that, and the other, which is a very personal question. I'm just joking. But then the other thing as well was, do you put heat mats under it? And so because these plants are cool weather, first of all, I keep my house at about 62 degrees roughly. We don't really run our heat much. Last year we didn't run it at all. We wanted to see how we did it, and it was pretty chilly. So this year we're, running about 62, 64 degrees. I don't put these plants on heat mats at all because they like that's like optimum temperature range for germination. And I'm not really having any issues germinating, but in the fall, I had the hardest time with them in the summer when I was doing it. And I think it's directly related to the temperature inside and the fact that the AC is running so it wasn't as humid and it was drier, and it seemed like things were just desiccating really fast. So that being said, I think there was an issue with that, and I know for a fact that your brassica issue is because, are you still planting them downstairs?
Remember last year, last year was the first year that I started some downstairs in the basement, but I also started stuff upstairs on my third floor. So like where the bedrooms are and stuff.
Yeah.
And they live longer, but they still succumbed, before I was able to get them outside.
Yeah, I think it's directly related to heat. I really do. It's just because you got to think too, once you turn the lights on, you're even raising the temperature even more.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of heat. I think it's a combination of humidity in my home in general. I'm actually, and I know you'll love this, I'm actually finally, as I was I'm still cleaning up my basement as of this recording, and I have garbage bags of milk cartons I've been saving for years. My neighbor, every now and again, she'll say, "You still collecting them?" I'm like, "Yeah." So I'm going to do some winter sowing. Every year I feel like I know what the thing is. Every year I come up and say, so I'm going to do some winter sowing. I feel pretty good about outdoors in a jug, sowing some of these brassicas. I'm going to see success with those compared to what I do indoors. And that's going to be a clear indicator that it's not the gardener, it's not the seeds, it's the environment.
Yeah.
And I also have, I don't know that I'm going to do this, but I also have the option to start some in my garage, so that, again, under lights, that's going to be as cold as it is outside, generally speaking. So it'll be interesting to see if I do that, the results of that. But yeah, it definitely is. It's not logical otherwise, that everything else that I start from seed is just fine, but these particular plants aren't.
So what I do in that scenario when you're in your garage is I would run my lights at night so that it would raise the temperature a little bit. And so you're not
That's a super good idea, I think.
Yeah.
It sounds smart.
Yeah, it is smart. Thank you. Well, I do that with my I have tropical bonsai trees that I keep in my garage in the wintertime, and I run the light at night just to raise that temperature a little bit more. May only be a degree, but it's still, that can be the difference between life and death. I did that video a while back about those zip up greenhouses. You know what I'm talking about? And I had a lady, she commented yesterday actually, and she was like, "I hate that thing." But she was like, "What I've used it for is I use it to start all my tropical seeds inside." She has it set up inside with the lights on in it. And it's raising the temperature like 5 degrees because you're building a microclimate in there. And I'm like, that is such a perfect use for that thing. That thing is garbage outside, but if you put that inside, you really can, you could put a space heater in there and just let it run a little bit, very little because it's so small, and it would change dramatically. So there's all kinds of ways you can do those types of things. But yeah, lights produce heat, so take advantage of that.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I think that ultimately, again, it's it's not my default. I want to be able to start these brassicas. I am super curious about, how some of my brassicas will perform if I finally get to the point of starting them from seed. I had some great luck with kale last year, and my kale plants kicked butt. And I was able to start those. Those made it with growing on my top floor, which generally you could argue would be the warmest as heat rises. But again, it's so far away from my furnace. And as I sit here kind of in the opposite room of where I had those plants, I haven't decided if I'm going to bring them in here, in my little office. It's directly next to a window, and it's chilly.
Yeah.
So the temperature in this room is cooler than the temperature in my basement. which
Right.
goes back to your point of these plants like it to be cool, and things like a heat mat. I don't think it's necessary. So the heat mat is just generally used to, promote germination, get the soil warm enough to have these seeds germinate. And the seed determines, like the type of seed it is determines how warm that soil really needs to be. I got some heat mats last year, and I think I only use them for like my summer plants, my heat loving crops.
Right.
Again, I don't want to completely give an opinion on I don't even know if it's nice to have. It's definitely not required, unless you are running stuff in a place that's super cool. So we'll see if I use them this year.
For me, it made a big difference because for my warm season crops, it really made them grow a lot faster. Mm-hmm. So there was that aspect of it. But generally speaking, I'm with you. For these cool weather stuff, it's just not important. I have lost your image on here. So anyways, what you can tell from this is we're talking a lot about planning the garden, and, having a good plan equals success. And one thing that we like to use is Planter app. And there's a link below that's going to get you a big discount on a lifetime subscription to it. And it helps you plan square foot garden interface, drag and drop, very visual. I just recently did on my YouTube channel a demonstration of it. And it's not really a demonstration, it's just me using it. And I'll be doing it again to plan my garden. But definitely check that out. And the good thing about it is I know there's some updates incoming for it, and it's continuously being updated and changed to make it more useful. And really, in my mind, in our mind, it's becoming a one-stop shop for your garden planning needs. And it's great to have them as a sponsor because they care about your garden as much as we do. So it's available on Google and Apple. You can use it on your phone, your tablet, your computer. And like I said, the link below is a lifetime subscription, and it gives you a big discount. So check that out. It's called the Planter app, and it's spelled Planter app. So there you go. And that's really makes a big difference because as we do all this, what we're going to notice is we've gone through all of these crops, and now we're starting to get into crops that need to be a little bit warmer. And so our seed starting date is going to set that forward. So at this point, I'd say about a month after you do your cabbages and stuff, it's about time to start your lettuces. What else? Lettuce, chard.
Yeah, I'd start chard a month for sure. So if we're more like in the March time frame.
Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely start chard. Lettuce is tricky. Depending. So if you're Ben, you could start lettuce like when you're starting those other plants.
No. I don't do that.
No?
I wait a month. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking at lettuce seedlings that are like a centimeter tall right now, and my cabbages need to go out.
The place I was headed was lettuce grows probably as fast, if not faster, than things like tomatoes for me. So I've started lettuce as early as January, and that's been too early for my area.
Yeah.
So February probably, I could, but March probably makes more sense. If I'm starting them in March, I'm probably planting them out sometime in April. That also gets tricky. It's kind of along the family of broccoli in that your window is kind of tight for being able to grow lettuce before it gets too hot. So that's one of those things I think play around. Lettuce seeds are so cheap. You can also get out there and direct sow some lettuce. I love the idea of starting lettuce indoors because you actually see things that look like the thing that you may eat.
Yeah.
So,
and we're talking about leaf type lettuces too.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Iceberg lettuce, head lettuce, it's same idea as the cabbages. It needs longer. And do you grow head lettuce?
I try year after year, but it gets too hot.
Yeah, I don't care for it, so I don't grow it.
So there's some of the, not an iceberg like lettuce, but there's some like buttery types that produce a head that I've grown or tried to grow year over year, and it never gets to like its full potential. You could argue that romaine produces a head too, but it never gets to its full potential. I end up pulling it early, or, a portion of it ends up bolting.
Man, I grew a so I don't really like the Buttercrisp lettuces and stuff like that. What are those called? You got romaine type, and then you've got, what is that?
I always thought it was just heading lettuce, leaf lettuce.
No. Yeah, it's like a leaf. It's a different kind of leaf lettuce. Anyways, like the floppier leaf lettuce, and I don't care for it. But this year I grew a micro lettuce. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. Man, I have really and thoroughly enjoyed that lettuce this year. It's blown my mind. It makes a much smaller head of lettuce, and I just cut the whole head. But man, one of those is about a meal for, once you add everything in. I have really enjoyed that this year, and I don't have any seeds now, but I'm doing multiple types of lettuce. I've got I like Little Gem romaine lettuce, so I do that, and then that's grows to, it's supposed to be smaller head, but last year I got them, they're like 2 feet tall. And then I also have a Vivian romaine lettuce. The only reason why I picked that's because my grandmother's name was Vivian, so I was like, yeah, let's do it. I'm not picky, when it comes to romaine types, but that is it can be very delicate, but I mean, it was 24 degrees last night, and my lettuces are still hanging in there. We'll see once, but it's gotten that cold before, and they've made it so they can handle it. But again, they need to be mature. And even though you can direct sow them, if we start them inside, we're just getting our harvest about a month earlier, roughly. Yeah,
I think that, so we talked about this, you and I, offline, meaning off the podcast, and I am back to start it by seed if I can start it by seed. The exceptions are probably going to be things like spinach, things like mustards, root crops are going to be the exceptions to the things that that I would start by seed. Lettuce just makes sense. It's always been easy for me to start by seed. It also helps me. It's a plug plant for me once I get outside, right? And I know that it's not going to be in the garden the entire year, and I feel good about pulling it at any time if I want. It is kind of planting it on the perimeter, corners and all. And this is probably one of the few crops that I'll say, if you have the space, plant a bunch of different varieties. And I say that because you can then decide which ones you really like.
Yeah.
So if you have the seeds, I know over the years you've probably bought a bunch of seeds, and if you have, and it's crazy how expensive lettuce is in the stores.
It is. And I can take a pack of seeds and grow 3 years worth of lettuce off of it. So, I mean, $5 at most. No, you said something interesting. You brought up spinach and root crops, and we're running low on time. Spinach can be started inside, but I find that if I wait a little bit longer and direct sow it, it works out much better. So, and that's in the spring. So I did that last year. I did a double row of it, and I was swimming in spinach. So this year I'm going to try and do a quadruple row of it.
Yeah, spinach is one of those crops that's really heat sensitive for me, and so that it's not like summer heat. It's like, again, going back to house heat. I've had spinach. I've brought it upstairs to start to harden it off, bringing it outside, back inside, and it's bolted in my dining room, like when I brought it in overnight, so over the course of a handful of days. So I definitely feel like in my garden, direct sowing it works out better. And so I've actually done some things we're past this point now, but I direct sowed some spinach last fall with the hope of it springing up, no pun intended, this spring. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's super duper hardy, which is interesting. And you could, depending on what you're going to do with it, you can almost never have enough of it if you're cooking it, for sure. But as a fresh green, I think you kind of fold in things like, mix it in with your less lettuce, right? Things like arugula, that could be started indoors, but I prefer when I grow it to direct seed it.
Yeah. And, when you get into direct sowing, you brought up root crops too. And the theory, like I grow a lot of rutabagas, and a lot of people say direct sow your rutabagas. Well, last spring I started them inside and planted them out, and I was very happy with the results. The trick is like especially with like rutabagas, if you're interested in that, is you can sow them, you can start them inside the same time as the lettuce, but they need to come out 1 month after you start them. Don't let them get too comfortable in there, and don't mess with the root that much. But when I did that last year, I was really happy. So I started some, I'm still waiting for them to germinate, and then we'll get those out. But that makes a big difference. So, you know, like carrots, I don't think, I know you've done them in pots and stuff, but like transplanting carrots is not recommended.
Yeah, it's just moving the entire container, though.
Yeah.
And there's an aphid nightmare that year, too. So the concept is, you know, the thing that you're eating is the root. And when you're transplanting something, generally you're disturbing the root. And so I remember when I first saw you starting rutabaga indoors, and I'm just like, I don't know, buddy, I'm saying this to myself, you know, and then I saw you harvesting rutabagas. So I'm like, well, I mean, clearly, you know? I'm glad I kept that thought to myself.
Yeah. Well, you know, I didn't know how it was going to turn out either, but it was worth a shot, because the way I looked at it was I was able to get a plant in the ground earlier. Again, when you would direct sow them, I was already putting a plant in the ground. Yeah. And so that worked out well. And not all plants are good like that, especially root crops, but that is one that really does help. And at the same time that I do that, I'm putting in carrots, but I'm direct sowing those. Yes, Batavia.
Yeah, I think just as we begin to wrap up and you start to think about like a lot of these crops that we've mentioned, you don't have to grow everything every spring. Right? You know, you can decide it. And the thing that spurred this is I didn't grow rutabagas last year. I regret it. I mean, it's not like it doesn't keep me up at night, you know, but it's something that I'll include in this year's. It wasn't intentional necessarily, right? But it's one of those things that will be included in this year's garden. And I feel good about it because now the anticipation around it is even higher, because I haven't had rutabagas since the year before last. Like I haven't even eaten them. And so I just want you to the listeners, you know, feel comfortable in, you know, you have the freedom to decide what you're growing in your garden, and that can change year over year. Right.
And that's a big point behind all of this is, you know, use your diet and what you desire to grow, but don't get big eyes and go crazy, because you've got to remember, we've also got to start our summer seeds. And now that we've done all this, the last ones to direct sow would be radishes and turnips. And then at the same time, you need to be starting probably your tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. And probably your eggplants and peppers first is recommended. And then you can you'll start that. So you're starting this whole cycle. And we're not really going to get into that because it's a little bit early. But I do want to say that even though we've given you the time frame, like generally speaking, the month of February is a big seed starting month for most people. Yes, Batavia?
So my final comment, and I concur with you when it comes to the summer plants, are check right behind it, you know.
Yeah.
Peppers for me are always going to be the first thing I start for summer. Yep. And I agree with you that peppers and eggplants take longer than, you know, I thought. So I think you're absolutely right. You got a little bit of play with tomatoes.
Yeah, you do.
Just generally speaking, because they can get up and get ready to get out pretty quickly. But yeah, man, you know, start thinking about those peppers that you want to grow this year. Start thinking about the 1 or 2 eggplants. Nobody needs more than 2 eggplants that you want to grow this year.
And I'm gonna solidify my theory behind seed starting and planting. You should never be planting cabbages at the same time as your tomatoes. As a matter of fact, you should be getting ready to pull your cabbages around the same time you're planting your tomatoes. And on that note, everybody, remember this. If you need any seed starting stuff, there is a link below to our Amazon store that will tell you everything that to lights, shelf, the whole 9, everything for all of the garden stuff that we use. And we've learned to grow, and we've grown for change right here on the Backyard Gardens podcast.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Thanks for checking out the show. If you like what we're doing and you'd like to support us, you can become a patron at patreon.com/backyardgardens, or you can be an Apple subscriber, and in both of those, you'll get an extra episode every month. You can also make a one-time PayPal donation with the link below, and you can get all kinds of gardening gear like t-shirts and mugs and cups from the link below at Teespring, and we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.